Welcome everyone to the IFS Down Under podcast, where we have deep conversations with leaders in the IFS space and honour and share stories of homegrown Australian IFS therapists and practitioners. I'm your host, Oliver Brooke, and I'm here today with my co-host, Suzanne Herrity. Welcome, Suzanne. Welcome to all your parts and your ancestors. Good to be with you again.
Thanks, Ollie. Good to be with you too.
Yeah. Before I introduce you, Derek, it's tradition in Australia to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm presenting, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and all First Nations people across Australia and North America. We acknowledge the devastating legacy burdens in our society, which have been caused by colonisation, and we acknowledge the devastating recurring impact that colonisation has had on First Nations people and the exiling of their elders, healers, languages, practices, children and culture. We acknowledge and respect their adaptive survival and their continuing protection of country, culture, language and healing practices. We pay our deepest respect to all their elders, healers, past, present and emerging, and we welcome all First Nations people to be a part of this conversation, and we hold a hope for healing for us all. Yeah. So today, Suzanne and I have the great pleasure of interviewing Dick Schwartz. Dick is a certified IFS therapist, social worker, and the founder of Internal Family Systems Counselling Association based in Canada. Dick runs a popular IFS YouTube site called IFSCA, which has over 22,000 subscribers. His videos have been viewed over 1.6 million times. And two of the most popular ones, and the ones that I've really appreciated, are a mini-series with Dick Schwartz about trauma. And Dick did a complete IFS session recording with himself as the therapist and Tammy Sollenberger as the client. It was one of the first full demos that I ever witnessed online, and it's just a great example of IFS therapy. Dick has over 35 years of clinical experience and has devoted himself to serving others through counselling for decades, including 18 years of AIDS work in grief and loss counselling. Dick is also a published author and has written chapters for several books, including Self-Led Grieving, Transitions, Loss and Death, in the IFS book, Innovations and Elaborations in Internal Family Systems Therapy. Dick now offers a suite of IFS resources, including his website, YouTube channel and videos, online masterclasses, and his kind of flagship 4-month online course called Stepping Stones, which we're going to talk about in this interview. Dick's also recently been working on and released a more advanced IFS course for graduates of Stepping Stones called Stepping Deeper. So it'd be good to hear about that as well. And Dick recently has been offering Stepping Stones specifically for an Australian audience. So we're going to hear about that as well also. So a warm welcome to you, Dick. Welcome to all your parts, your ancestors. Great to have you on the show.
Cheers. Yeah. And do you prefer Oliver or Ollie?
I go by either, but some of my parts like Ollie.
Okay, let's go with Ollie.
Let's go with Ollie.
Yeah, welcome, Dick. So great to have you here. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah.
What are you excited about, Suzanne? What's your excited part telling you?
Oh, my excited part is telling me that, I've watched you so much on YouTube at this stage that it's great to have you here in person.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So just to start, I wanted to name for everybody that's listening my intention for bringing you on here. So my intention for asking you to be a guest is that many of my IFS supervisees and workshop participants, Suzanne and I run an introductory IFS workshop in Perth, Western Australia. A lot of them have been wanting to get onto the level 1 training, but there's only 1 or 2 that are run in Australia each year. And so the demand is way exceeding the supply of trainings. And so people are looking for alternatives and wanting to develop themselves into the model and integrate the different components of it. And they feel like there isn't anything available. So one of the reasons of asking you to come on with us is to explore some other options that people might have and talk about what you're offering. Yeah. But before we kind of go into that, we'd love to hear a bit about you and about your journey to getting to this point. And so I was wondering if you could tell us, to start with, about the beginning of your IFS journey and talk about kind of the origins of that, if you'd be willing to, and kind of how that became part of your own personal healing practice, and also about how it impacted you as a professional. Big question.
Sure, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
I'm actually in the process of writing a book, so I've just been writing some of this down, so it's quite fresh.
Oh, good.
So yeah, about 20 odd years ago, I was in private practice. My background's in Gestalt therapy. One of my clients came in, he held up this book and he said, have you seen this book? I'm like, no. And it was Introduction to Internal Family Systems. So I read it, and I've got skeptical parts, so I'm reading it with like, yeah, you could see it that way. Yeah, there's one way of looking at it, well, I mean, maybe. And by the end of the book, I'm like, this is really good. So I reread it, and I rarely reread a book, but my skeptical part was like, it stepped back. I'm like, this is great. So the next time I saw that client, I said, do you want to try some of that IFS stuff? And he's like, yeah. So by the end of the session, he had a different part on 12 different floors of a hotel. He didn't know why, but more importantly, I didn't know why. So I thought, there's more to this, right? There's more to this. I should check it out. And that year, Dick was still running with Barb Cargill retreats in Maya Tulum in Mexico. So there was one coming up in February, which I thought was ridiculously expensive for a week. However, it's a week in Mexico in February. And if you live in Canada in February, you don't want to be there. So, at least in Ontario. So I'm weighing up, like, it's really expensive. Well, it's a tax write-off, and it is a week in Mexico, but it's a week with therapists. You don't even like therapists, okay? So I realized later these were different parts, right? But at the time, I'm like, so I go, and then I get there, and I don't know about you folks, but whenever I'm in a new environment, I have a lot of protective parts that are up, because as a kid, I hopped from school to school to school. And I'd always start like midterm, and that's when the cliques are established and the bullies are waiting for the new kid, right? So I learned to be funny. I've got funny parts, because I learned early on that bullies don't look good if they beat up a clown, right? So be funny. So I'm down, so I find myself down in Mexico, and the first thing I notice is the location is on the beach, and so the first part of me that comes up is, this is not accessible. What's wrong with these people? This isn't an accessible venue. Don't they give a shit? Blah, blah, blah. So my critical parts are up right away.
Yep.
Dump my bag in the room, find my way to the big yurt where the teaching's taking place. I look around, and there's Dick Schwartz. And I recognize him from his book cover. And he's surrounded by women, and it looks like, for my critical part, it looks like they're fawning on him. And I'm like, oh God, is this a cult? Have I walked into the latest American cult, and I've got a week with these cult people, ugh. And so I look around, and there's all these backjacks in a circle. And it's like, yeah, I can't hide in the corner. I have to actually sit next to someone. But I'm also, as far as I can tell, I'm the only fag that's there, right? Again, that's not uncommon for me, but it's like I'm queer. I like to be in queer culture. I like queer community. So to spend a week with a bunch of straight people, as lovely as they are, so I wasn't terribly happy. And then over the course of the week, about midway through, my parts began to settle down. There was a couple of reasons. One was I got to be the subject of a demo with Dick, which was life-changing, that one single session. And I realized that he's a good guy. He's humble. And what he's bringing is brilliant. It's a complete game changer. So I said to him that night, you figured it out, didn't you? He said, figure what out? I said, the personality system, you figured it out. And then his shy part came up, and he said, well, I guess I kind of did. And I said, you bastard, I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to be the guy that figured it out, but you've gone and done it, right? And I'll tell you a little bit about the session that was so transformative. The day before, I'd had my first ever IFS session with one of his senior staff, and I got as far as in my belly, there was this kind of lozenge-shaped thing, and it was green. So now I'm the subject of a demo, we're surrounded by all the other students. And Dick's like, where do you want to start? And I said, well, I'm curious about this thing in my belly. I don't know what's there. So he guided me to focus in on it. As I'm focusing in, it begins to crack. And I'm aware that there's a pecking inside. Now, at the time, I've been studying a fair amount of First Nations, Indigenous teachings. And I thought, oh, maybe this is my power animal. Maybe there's an eagle that's going to come out of my belly or the hara, and that's going to have like information for me. So I was very excited. And sure enough, this little being pops out of the lozenge, and it's Woodstock from the Snoopy cartoons, little yellow bird. Yeah. So I'm like, great. Everybody else gets a power animal. I get Woodstock. Great. Right? Yeah. But Dick's like, well, let's see what it wants to tell you. Just stay with it. I'm like, okay, what do you want to tell me? And it turned out that in my family of origin, I was a really happy, joyous little kid. But whenever I'd manifest joy, my mother, it would trigger a competitive part in my mother, right? So she'd be like, oh, yeah, you're happy now. Well, wait and see, right? You'll learn, blah, blah, blah. This really negative response to my like, woohoo, life's great. So my parts of me, and the folks that are listening that understand IFS will know what this is, parts that like to manage and take care of everything, they decided this is not a safe environment to be joyful in. We're going to tuck you away until it's safe to come out. So this part of me got exiled, but unlike the usual definition of exiles, no burden. It didn't believe there was anything wrong with it for being so joyous. It was just kind of sequestered in the system. Dick told me later this was the first time he'd encountered a non-burdened exile. So that became part of the teaching, right? So I welcome this little Woodstock home, basically. He wants to tuck himself into my heart. This is not unlike soul retrieval work from shamanism. And then he became embodied. So this joy was present to me. Now, it's not as if I'd had a joyless life up until that point. However, I had experienced significant depression, suicidality, various points. So suddenly I'm suffused with this joy. And then in what felt very surreal, we broke for lunch. Like, okay. And my good student part's like, I should go and journal about this. So I'm on my way to my place where I'm staying. And then this part was like, can I swear? Yeah. Oh, good. My part was like, fuck this. And we went down to the beach, threw off our clothes. I'm 40 years old. I'm doing cartwheels in the surf. You know, when a kid has so much joy, their body can't contain it. They jump up and down. It was that. We're just so happy. And it stayed. It stayed right through to the end of the week and arguably right through till now. So I flew home at the end of the week. There was a 3-hour delay at the airport going back to Toronto. Everyone's grumpy on the flight. It's 3 in the morning. I'm just like, woo. They search my luggage because they think I'm high. I was high, but not on any substances, right? And they're going through, very serious customs officers with white gloves on. And I'm just like cracking wise. It's like, that is the best Minnie Mouse impression I've ever seen. What else you do is impressions, blah, blah, blah. They're squeezing my toothpaste. No, nothing, right? So I came home. I'm like, this is really important. This guy is so onto something. Went onto YouTube, and there was nothing on YouTube at the time. I thought, what century do you people live in? So I went to the local electronics store, and I got a video camera, came home, made 2 cheesy little videos, understanding the personality system and working with the personality system, because I thought information has to get out there, right? And then ran around my house with a stepladder and the video camera and a script. And then took the camera back because you can have it for 2 weeks without paying for it, which I really appreciated. I think that's what they said. And I'd just been to Mexico. And that started me both teaching IFS and realizing how much I like to make videos as a way of teaching. Yeah. But there's something I want to add, which was really precious to me. So I made this video and I emailed Dick and I said, hi, I've made this video about understanding the personality system. Can you have a look at it so it's okay to upload. And he emailed back and he said, I couldn't open it, Derek, but I trust you. And I thought, wow, you are trusting me to represent your baby online. Wow, that meant a hell of a lot to me, you know. So that was the beginning of my IFS journey. And
Wow.
here I am. Yeah, it was very cool. It was so cool.
Wow. That
Yeah.
sounds so cool. I
Yeah.
love that. And I love
Yeah.
the way you were talking about your skeptical parts and walking into this yurt and all these people on backjacks and where the hell am I and
Yeah.
what is this about? Is it a cult? I love that because I just heard you say that you've come from a Gestalt background and I resonate with that. I come from a Gestalt school of thought as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm really just curious now about how you see IFS to be different to other psychotherapies and what it is about IFS that you believe is changing psychotherapy.
I think the main thing is it's the only therapy that I'm aware of which is predicated on there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with our clients. There's nothing wrong with any of us. Right? So shit has happened to you. Correct me if I'm wrong, Suzanne, but I'm just going to go with this, right? So shit's happened to you.
Yeah, just a little.
Just tiny bit, yeah. Your parents have helped you cope, bless their hearts, right?
Yeah.
And now we're able to go beyond coping into the healing. That's what this is about for me. And I regard IFS more than anything else as a healing conversation between the practitioner and the client's system.
Yeah.
Right? And that conversation, when you know how to have it, and when you know how the internal system is orchestrated, inevitably leads to the unburdening process. It does. It simply does. Because once the protective system knows that I respect and deeply appreciate it and actually love it for what it does, all of it, even the parts that don't like each other.
Yeah.
And when the client realizes that the client's self is able to do the same, that's when the protective system will soften and allow access to the parts that it is so fiercely protective of, which are the parts holding the distress or the burdens, right? And that's where the healing happens. So the agent of healing is the client's own self-energy, which everybody has, no matter what's happened to you. There used to be this notion, you probably know, the Winnicottian notion that if you didn't have good enough parenting, you were kind of, fucked. That's not the case, right? Because self exists unhurt by no matter what's happened to the system and is available. So for me, it's a psycho-spiritual model. We're working with compassion. We're actively working with or channeling compassion to do the healing, and it works.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it does work. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for
music to my ears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Music
Yeah.
to
Keeps
all our
that hope
hearts' ears.
alive. Yeah.
Okay, one at a time.
Yeah. We're too excited, aren't we, to say something?
Do you have something more, Suzanne, or can I jump in?
No, you can go.
Okay. So many things you're saying, Derek, are kind of bouncing around for me and seem very important. But I really appreciated you sharing that origin story, and especially about kind of where you were at before you got there, and then this kind of unfolding of trust that developed between you and the model and you and Dick. And I'm curious about, you mentioned you were already studying kind of indigenous kind of healing techniques. You mentioned shamanism and soul retrieval and how similar that is to the IFS kind of unburdening process. And I'm just curious if you can say more about that, because I've noticed those parallels as well. And it feels like in Western psychotherapy, we were going in a direction that was all about, we're broken, you need to be different, this is how you can be a good human being.
Yeah.
And now we're returning to, no, you're whole, you've been burdened by the systems and the things that have happened to you. And if we just stay with you in an open, compassionate, safe way, like a lot of those indigenous healing practices, then your system will naturally kind of come to its own unburdening and healing once those protectors trust. So, yeah, could you say any more about kind of those connections that you've made? I'm just, yeah.
Sure, they're not my connections. I teach an
Yeah.
advanced weekend after the Stepping Stone course, and I've been gifted with a video of a masterclass that I hosted, where I hosted Ed Yates. Now, Ed Yates was trained by Michael Harner in that school of shamanism,
Yeah.
and I ran into him at the IFS conference a few times, and he's a really good guy, really knows his stuff, and he used to do a one-day at the conference for anyone that wanted to experience a kind of more shamanic healing. And he draws these brilliant parallels, one of his slides, where I don't want to misrepresent him. Here's the essence of what he says. Spirit, which he regards as vital to our healing and always attendant to us, our guides, our ancestors. In what I learned as sociocentric communities, but communities where the family is really important. You don't make a move without considering family and community. Many of the indigenous communities around the world have that as their understanding with each other. So in more traditional sociocentric communities, the shaman is the healer, and not all shamans are healers, but some are. And the ones that are facilitate the healing, but also with the support of the community.
Yeah. And
then in Western culture, we've got the egocentric culture where, fuck you, if you're my sister, I'll do whatever I want, And so what Ed's proposition is that what Spirit did was it's okay, this is shifting. It's a different way that people are being with each other, with themselves. We need to introduce healing in a different way, and then offered the IFS modality as well as maybe others, but certainly the IFS modality via Dick Schwartz's guides. So that's how he came across the model. And so that's some of the parallels and differences with shamanic practices. But if you look at traditional shamanic practices, soul retrieval is one, the sense of power with, which is not power over, right? And you can parallel that with self, is power with the parts, right? We're coming in this really powerfully compassionate way with the parts. So Ed articulates it far better than I do, but I am aware of some of those parallels and differences.
No, thank you for sharing that. Ed Yates. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with Michael Harner. Yeah, I've read a couple of his books and watched some videos of him, and yeah, definitely noticed a few of those parallels. I really appreciate you kind of fleshing that out for us. I'm curious to look up Ed. So you mentioned earlier as well that a lot of people perceive themselves in a way that sees them as broken, or they have parts that believe that they're broken. And I know that you talk about that on your website as well, that at some point you perceived yourself as broken. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I also have had parts that have seen myself as broken or wrong or not good enough in some way. And I just wonder, and I think you asked me to ask you this question, what would you say to people that feel or think or believe that they're broken and that there's no hope for them?
Yeah. I think in response to that, I want to talk a little, two things I want to talk about. One is, one thing I want to talk about, maybe the other one will come back.
Yeah.
So one of the things that was very problematic for me as a young boy, as a 12-year-old boy, was I was becoming aware of my sexual orientation. And this would have been 1974, small town England, where the word homosexual was never even used. Back in the day, the word cancer wasn't even talked about. It was the C word, right? So I had these vague notions of these kind of shadowy men. Like my mother would say, if there's a man in the car and he offers you a sweet, don't get in the car. And I'm like, okay, that sounds weird, but okay. But there was a sense of like, there's these shadowy men that might want to hurt me, right?
Yeah.
And then I became aware of my sexual orientation and wanted to know more about what this was. So I went to the local bookstore to look at their medical dictionary, because we had a dictionary at home, but I didn't want to open it to the H page in case it looked thumbed, So I'll go to the bookstore and then I'm safe. So I pulled down this medical dictionary. I think at this point it was 14 years old. And looked up homosexuality, and I remember, because I've done work with this 14-year-old part, because he went into shock. Because what it said was homosexuality, perverse form of sexuality associated with pedophilia. So he looked up perverse, and then he looked up pedophilia. And that was the only information he had. So what he believed, what he fully believed, was that he was going to grow up to become a man who would want to hurt young boys in very specific sexual ways. That was his destiny, according to the medical dictionary. Right? So he lived with that for a bit. And then his dog died, and his dog was his sole companion, and his dog died. And he decided he was done, and attempted suicide at the age of 14, very cleverly, left school in a way that he wouldn't be missed, took his Tupperware of water, took all Mum's sleeping tablets, and had the sleeping tablets been barbiturates, that would have worked. As it turned out, at 14, I didn't know the difference between barbiturates and non-barbiturates, but it turned out they weren't. So I woke up at 2 in the morning in the woods, freezing cold, and found my way home. I've been able to come to that kid and let him know there is never anything wrong with love, and how you love is how you love, and it's beautiful. And he was able to release the burdens it had taken on. But part of how that informs my work is, where do these burdens come from? Where does this sense of I'm not okay come from? Where does this sense of I'm broken come from? And you have to me, you know, therapy doesn't exist in a vacuum. You have to look at the toxic ideology that informs all of our social structures, including the family. We live in a world which is homophobic, misogynist, transphobic, racist, ableist, lookist, you name it, right? And if you happen to fall on any of those not acceptable areas, parts of us will internalize, there's something wrong with me, I'm not okay. And the gift of this work is we can both come to that part, because burdens are not innate, because no baby sits there saying, what's wrong with me? And most of us would not look at a baby and say, oh yeah, that's not a good one. Because burdens are not innate, they get taken on during our life journey. If they get taken on, they can by definition be released. But when we take them on, they can feel like, at my core, Ollie, if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me. Right? And that's but separating out that intense feeling, which belongs to a part, from who I am at my core, which is not that part. And that's the gift of the IFS model. At our core, we have, as you know, what Dick refers to as self or self-energy. We are all compassionate, caring, kind, calm, creative, courageous. That's available to all of us once the parts will allow that to emerge, right? So now I feel like I'm rambling. This part's saying, Derek, you're rambling. So I hope I'm making sense.
You're making so much sense, Derek. Yeah, really, really appreciate the depth of that sharing as well. And yeah, it resonates with my own experience. I mean, I'm a heterosexual man, so I haven't experienced that level of system discrimination about my sexuality. But what I have experienced is specific traumas that have pushed away parts of me that were expressive and creative and playful and wanted to be seen and felt and held and things like that, by a culture in Australia that doesn't allow young men to have those parts. And I went to an all-boys private school where it wasn't okay to express in that way unless you were sort of seen a particular way or part of a drama club or something like that. There was sort of tiny little windows where you were allowed to do it, but then the majority was you would be bullied or you'd be condemned or you'd be insulted if you showed parts of you like that. So I can relate on some level to those internalized things happening in larger systems. And then what would you say to someone now who's never done IFS and you know, hasn't had what you and I have had, which is healing in relationship with someone who can take us to those places? How would you give them hope?
Well, it depends what they'd be presenting with. Give me an example of what they might be saying to me.
What would you have said to your 14-year-old boy at that point, knowing what you know now?
Oh, exactly what I did say to him when I encountered him internally, that, you know, how you love is how you love, and how you love is beautiful, right? However, in terms of the healing, it's not a question of, you know, here's my opinion, which he can discount.
Yeah.
I needed first to hear his story. I needed to witness the distress that he took on, the deep, deep shame that he took on, that he was, as far as he knew, a baby child molester.
Okay.
And that he would grow up to be one of these perverse child molesting men. That wasn't acceptable to him. Better to die
Yes.
than to be
Than to be
that,
that.
right? Yeah. And he needed me to witness fully how deep that shame, how desperate that shame went, right? And the shame that he would inevitably bring to his parents if he was a child molester. And, you know, and because he's a child molester, he'd never have a child of his own. And the grief around that, and so much for him to carry at 14 with nobody to talk to.
Yeah.
Nobody who could possibly share that with because of the shame.
Yeah.
Right. And the projection of the shame and the fear that he'd be shamed even more because he's disgusting. That was the depth of what he believed. And that's what I was able to both go in and witness and help him to release.
Yes.
And
yes.
And shame is the core exile that we all carry, because shaming is intergenerational, because it's a very effective form of behavior control. Children would do anything to avoid being shamed. There's really nothing worse than there's something wrong with you, you're unlovable, you shouldn't have even been born, right? If you go into shame, those kind of beliefs are present. Anyone that would come to me saying, I don't feel good about myself, or I feel like I'm broken, that's a part of you that's holding shame. Can we get to know it? Because if when I was 14 in that bookstore, a trusted adult had come over and said, oh, you know what? Those definitions are inaccurate. You know, they shouldn't even be in there. And maybe you're reading them because you're homosexual yourself, and you don't have to tell me if you are. But I want you to know that if you are, you have a really valuable place in the world, just like everybody else does. If that had happened at 14, that kid wouldn't have taken on the burden that there's something wrong with me. So when we're going internally into the parts of us that are kind of frozen in time like that, and we bring in that compassionate witnessing, it's as if it had happened at the time. And then, because they're now witness, these parts are able to release everything they've been holding and take in what's true for them. And that's an astonishing gift and a really radical understanding of what we're doing in psychotherapy.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating that. And what I hear is so much hope in that. That for even these really heavily burdened, traumatized young parts, that there is a way of holding them, witnessing them in a compassionate place, so that their stories can be understood, what happened to them can be understood, and then also there can be a space to release it and take on a new belief and a new understanding. And you can be that person that then gives them that parenting experience, like that compassionate adult you just kind of talked about that came over and did that thing.
I can do that if I'm working with my own system. If I'm working with a client system, then they get to be that victim.
Right. Suzanne, did you want to?
I guess I just wanted to ask just about, you know, what you've been speaking about, Derek, and just the interconnection with your journey with self. How you understand, you know, self or self-leadership, and what that looks like for you on a day-to-day basis now, whether that be internally or, you know, in the external world. I'm really just curious about that, you know, especially like learning or listening to you talk about that 14-year-old part.
So let me speak to the external world first. Before I'd healed that kid, I was vulnerable to homophobic comments coming my way, right? Because they would land on that kid that would feel like, oh, there's something wrong with me. And I wouldn't respond like there's something wrong with me. I'd respond in like a joke or tell them to fuck off, or depending on which part was trying to help me out and help out that kid. But since he's been healed, I don't have vulnerability to homophobia. So if someone, and this happened fairly recently, somebody said to me, oh, you're a gay man with a kid? how does that work out? And I thought, oh, you have homophobic parts that are aggressing on me. That sucks for you, because chances are you're not going to much musical theater. And I can cite that in the broader, homophobic world that we live in, that this person believes it's okay to say that to me because they have like the permission from the broader culture. But it doesn't land, it doesn't hurt. And I don't need to get defensive. I can just go, oh, you have homophobic parts on the inside. So that's the outside world. And on the inside world, I mean, I've been, aware of this way of understanding being for 20 years now. So, I'll quite often go out with the dogs and I'm like, okay, who's up? Which parts are up? And used to be my inner critic has become my inner consultant. And he might say something like, hey, you know what? When you were on that podcast, you were a little abrupt with Ollie. Why don't you just go back and check that he's okay? Right? I don't believe I was, Ollie, but that would be the kind of thing that the consultant would say. And I'd be, okay, thank you. I'll do that. And initially, when we're doing the internal work, the parts that want the attention are the parts that are holding distress, or the ones compelled by the parts holding distress. So it can feel a bit like, oh, I don't want to go there. But once we've helped them out, and there's more awareness in the system that my self-energy exists, other parts can pop up that don't fit they're not therapeutic, wanting therapeutic work. They're just gorgeous little parts. And a couple of years ago, I was out walking the dogs, and I'm like, okay, who's up? And this 10-year-old boy popped up with, in England, we have National Health Service glasses, so the blue plastic glasses. And I'm like, hello. And he's like, hello. Anyway, it turns out that this part likes to think, actually loves to think, and loves to think about thinking. Like, he's really smart, right? He just loves to get in these loops in his head. And when I was 10, I was bullied quite a bit. So I've worked with some of the bullied parts. He wasn't bullied. And in fact, he would look at the bullies and feel sorry for them because he thought they probably don't know how to think. Which is why they go around doing this stupid stuff, right? I'm just like, I adore you. You're 10 years old and you're so cool. So that was a delightful part to just encounter on a walk, right?
Yeah.
Didn't want anything else other than just to be, welcomed, like hello. So
yeah. So I guess what I hear from you is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I could be just, I could have my analytical part coming in, trying to make sense of this as I do. But it's like, the more that you get used to your inner world and your inner environment, the more access that you have to that self-leadership and that self-energy.
Well, so two things, Suzanne. You're never alone with your parts, which is great. So like if I'm watching TV and I've got a lonely part that comes up, I'll invite him to sit next to me. Right? Let's watch TV together, which is really sweet. And the other thing is, the unburdening process where, as I said, it's the inevitable outcome of the conversation, right? That the part that holds the distress gets to release it. Every time it does that and it takes in what's true for it, there's more self-energy available for the whole system because the burdens have blocked that part's self-energy, which is the way it wants to manifest in the world. Like you were saying, Ollie, your little ones that wanted to manifest in a particular way in the boys' school, right? So once the, it's not okay that you do that is released, then it gets to manifest itself and I get to have more self-energy available. So it's an ongoing process, this self-leadership thing about getting to know your parts, unburdening the ones that need unburdening, welcoming them all because they are amazing. The ones that don't like each other, like the manager that tells me if I eat too much chocolate, I'll turn into a fat pig. And the part that loves eating chocolate that says, fuck you to the manager. It's like, oh, there's like two kids fighting, right? It's like, hello, boys. Okay. And I could just delight in them because they're both like, we want chocolate. We want to be slim. Okay.
Yeah. I'm just, I'm resonating with that, but I'm also, just thinking of the hope that you're described, feeling so much hope for all of our systems, even just as humans, that, that IFS offers us. you know.
Well, and the thing is, for me, is it's reality-based hope. It's not Pollyanna. You know, like my skeptic, when I discovered 20 years ago this method, my skeptical part is like, we'll see, right? And I think if you're a therapist without a skeptical part, you should get one, because mine's, mine tells me it keeps us honest. There's so much bullshit in the therapy world. This keeps me honest. But the skeptical part is just kind of like really irritated, because for 20 years it's been looking for the cracks, right? Like where it is, and it can't find them. Possibly complex PTSD is not amenable to IFS right away, but aside from that, and it's kind of like, damn, but it's been looking like diligently, so that I don't invest in something that's a cult, and so that, more importantly, so that I never do harm when I'm working with people. Right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, so the hope is realistic, and on a broader context, for me, when I first came across this model, I said to Dick, this is revolutionary and it's evolutionary. Because if I've got a lot of self-energy and I raise my kid to welcome all her parts, right, so that she knows that she is welcomed in the world and that she belongs. And if I don't shame her, or if I do, I take responsibility for it so she doesn't take on the burden, then I've got a really healthy kid. And if we all do that, we've got really healthy kids. And if we are raising people that can respond from compassion, the way the world's going right now, if we don't evolve, if we don't welcome people that are suffering as they need to migrate as a result of climate, for example, I think we're fucked. I think we need to do that, right? And it's the difference between, I've got a loaf of bread. I can give you the end of it, and I can be a little bit hungry, but you get to live. Or this is my bread. It's not my fault you don't have bread. Right? So that's the way it's going. And for me, this is a reality-based, now evidence-based, appropriately hopeful way to facilitate the healing, because that part of me that says, this is my bread, right? That would be a protective part. And it would be connected to a part that's worried about scarcity or something. So if I heal the part that's worried about scarcity, maybe it went hungry as a kid. Maybe as an infant, I was regimented in my food and I didn't get to eat when I was hungry. So there's this part that's like, if I give you my bread, I'm going to die. Well, if I can heal that, then I don't need to hoard my bread, and I can share it with you.
Yeah. Makes so much sense.
It does, right?
So much sense. Yeah, love it. I just want to ask you another thing. You mentioned shamanism earlier on, and I have a very close connection with shamanic practice, and especially being from Ireland, it's a very important piece to me in my work. But I'm just wondering, for you, how does IFS align with your own spiritual beliefs?
Well, one of the reasons I got so excited when I found IFS was I'd been looking at the time for how to integrate humanistic psychotherapies with transpersonal psychotherapies. And this does it for me. And so the way it integrates that for me is when we're talking about self and self-energy, you can look at that one of two ways. If you go to quantum physics, for example, as you may know, if you look for if you at a subatomic level, if you look for evidence of a wave, you'll find a wave. But if you look for evidence of a particle, you'll find a particle, because what you're looking for at that level is informed by how you're looking. So similarly, I had a chat with Dick about this a while ago, and he agreed with me. So this isn't just me. But we can look at, this is me and my compassion healing these parts, or I am accessing and channeling compassion. So that's the wave. This is the particle, right? In terms of the impact on the parts and the healing of the system, it doesn't matter. But it matters to me, because my spirituality is such that there is the foundations of the universe are compassion and love and that kind of healing. I've also been blessed to do a number of medicine journeys in my life, which just confirm that, right? So for me, you know, when I'm at my best, I'm able to open to channel that compassion, bring it into my own system, facilitate the client's compassion being available for their system. And, you know, if you've got a private practice where, say you have 20 individuals, and every individual, every week, you are doing your best to manifest your compassion with them. That for me is a spiritual practice. It simply is. And we can call it psychotherapy because it is, but it's a psychotherapy for me, which is deeply rooted in spirituality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is like gold to my system. I'm like, yes, yes, I love this.
Me too. Me too. I love this.
Get rid of the word psychotherapy. Let's just, you know,
Yeah.
It's a compassion-based spiritual practice.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I love that.
And even the fact, Suzanne, that this model is often referred to as a non-pathologizing model. What does that tell you about the other ones? Like, why would you even have to say that? Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I know. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hearing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holly, what you got?
Yeah, psychotherapy is not free from the systemic burdens. And there's lots of models that take on the qualities and the assumptions and the beliefs of the systems that they form in. And
Unexamined, completely unexamined. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And IFS, luckily, with wherever Dick was able to do that from, and listening so deeply to his clients and to his parts and guides, he was able to be free of that and find a way to tap into what is innately human, which is this beautiful, compassionate, spiritual presence inside us, which IFS calls self. And that
let me build on that. Yeah, because so traditional psychotherapy. So just for listeners who may not know, there are manager parts of us that like to manage everything, and they're proactive to make sure that the vulnerable parts don't get triggered. When the vulnerable parts do get triggered, we have reactive protective parts that want to provide comfort to them or distract from them. That's what the protectors do with the vulnerable parts. So typically, what we call a manager part will drag the client to therapy and say, we have to work on the drinking, right? The drinking's getting out of hand. We're drinking at lunchtime now. We're going to lose our job, right? That's a manager in the client system. And the therapist manager part will say, oh, that does sound like a problem. What can we do about the drinking? Let's try titrating off. Let's try 12-step programs. Let's try rehab. And the poor drinking part that is doing its best to help in the only way it knows how gets demonized by the therapist in that model and is not recognized for what it's attempting to do, which is to distract from or provide comfort to a more vulnerable part. And if you work with people that identify as addicts, they will tell you that they're self-medicating, and they will tell you the part they're self-medicating around, right? Which is beautiful. So in IFS, I would say to the same scenario, but I'd say, okay, there's a part of you being, bent out of shape by the drinking. Listen into that part and how come it's so bent out of shape. And it was, it's ruining my life. It ruined my relationships. I've been an alcoholic since I was 15. Great. Okay. Now, that one that's sent you to rehab and 12 steps and everything else, how successful would it say its efforts have been? And the part will say, not very successful. Good. Would it be willing to pull its energy back so we can try something different? So we can get curious about the drinking part. When it started, what was going on in the client's world, which part is it protective of in its perhaps somewhat desperate way. Okay? And so instead of demonizing what's going on, we're welcoming everything, and then we're coming into the vulnerable parts. Once the vulnerable part is witnessed and is able to release its vulnerability, the drinking part can calm down, and then the manager part can calm down as well. But you might have, for example, a socially anxious part. That's really common. So every time you go out or you go to an office function or whatever it is, throw back a couple of drinks or smoke a joint before you go, right? So that socially anxious part isn't up. But if you track the socially anxious part, I remember dropping off my kid in grade 1. My poor, she was 5, right? It's like, here you go. And I'm looking around the playground. There's all these weird little kids. I mean, one's like licking another one's face, and another one's like, I don't know, trying to jump. Oh God. And she looked at me and said, Daddy, what should I do? And in this spectacularly bad moment of parenting, I said, go and play. Fuck. Right? Like, poor kids. So she just wanders around trying to. And I thought, this is probably like the origins of social anxiety, right? Like, this, if you did that and you had no social skills, you'd never been with anybody else, like in that context, it'd be terrifying, right? But a little 5-year-old stuff goes off and goes over to the kid that's licking the other one. I'm like, oh God. So it's a personal story, but you can see how social anxiety, for example, could track back to an experience like that, right? And if I have to go to the office function and I'm really nervous about meeting other people because they might lick my face, then I might throw down a drink or two. It's just what that part does.
Yep.
Then if I'm relaxed, I might throw down another couple of drinks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now I feel like dancing at the office party, so I'm going to have another couple of drinks. And then the next day I have to go to work with a hangover, and the manager's going to beat me up, right? What's wrong with you? You're an idiot. They're going to see how stupid you are, blah, 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 blah. And then the drinking part's going to say, well, I have every right to drink, and it was a party, and blah, blah, blah. And the part that gets lost is that young part that's socially anxious. But now we know that when those strong protective impulses are there, as you know, we call that a trailhead, right? We'll track that because we know that there's a vulnerable part which is catalyzing those parts into their actions.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so many parallels to what you're speaking about. Suzanne and I are currently on a level 2 training with C. Sykes, which is talking about compassion for addictive processes and all of the wonderful teachings she has, and the way that you just described that dynamic between the manager and the drinking part. Many parallels to what she teaches.
Yeah, Cecil's great.
Yeah, she's great.
She is. Yeah.
Okay. Just noticing the time, and I'm wondering if this is a good chance to ask you about the work that you're doing now and what you're offering and where you're at with IFSCA. You know, we know about the YouTube channel and we've talked a little bit about that. But what other services, workshops, things are you exploring? Yeah, what would you like to talk about?
So one thing that's really important to me is that IFS-related material is accessible and affordable. So I set up master classes periodically. I just have one with Marth Sweezy, whose book on shame and guilt. If you haven't read it, get that. It's brilliant. Martha's brilliant as a clinician. So that was good. Got one coming up on IFS and the eating system, which in most therapies is called eating disorders. It's not a disorder, it's a system. That's Kim Daniels. In the new year, I've got Bob Falconer talking about past lives in IFS. Also, Francois Ledoz, who's a French, was the trainer, I believe, at the IFS Institute, and has developed his, he's also a neurologist, so he's developed this model which incorporates polyvagal theory, attachment theory, IFS, and neuroscience. Is brilliant for working with trauma. So he'll be presenting in March, I think. So those master classes, I think they're about $100 American for a 3-hour class, but you can come in at different rates. So if you're broke, come in at the working poor or the unemployed rate, which I think is 25 or $30. So most folks can afford that, I think. So that's important, that there's some availability and accessibility financially. Then I run the Stepping Stones course, which I just love. It's been 5 years in the making to get it to this place. It's 14 weeks? 16 weeks, 4-week modules. And they're great. So module 1, it's called Just Ask. Just get used to, doing the internal inquiry. And then the second week, there's supervised practice sessions where it's like when you first learn to drive, it's like, and after that, there's a peer practice session because not everybody likes to be supervised and they feel inhibited. So the peer group helps to build community as well. And then the 4th week is a 3-hour consult group. So any questions coming up from the work, we address. And then there's module 2, which looks at common protector concerns and how to address them, which if you're coming into a target part. Module 3 is focusing on your own therapist parts, that if you don't know them, you're going to be acting from them and they will block your self energy. And module 4 is really operating from self. So what happens if you don't make those interventions and your client knows their system? So just sitting, practicing holding self energy whilst the client who knows now the model is able to do their own work. So and then between each module, there's the practice sessions, and then the consult groups. When people have graduated, there's an advanced weekend if they want, where we're looking at the more what you might call esoteric aspects of the model. So guides, shamanism, Locke Kelly's work on accessing source with self, and legacy burdens. In that advanced weekend, I have what I think is the only recording of working with someone when guides come in. So guides come into this woman's process and they start facilitating her healing, which is remarkable to have recorded. So lovely advanced weekend. And the Stepping Deeper program that you mentioned earlier, that's not mine. That's my senior staff. And they spent months developing it and they're running it in January. But for the first time, I'm also working right now with an Australian cohort. And I have to say, I really like working with Australians. I'm from England originally, and Canadians have this kind of middle-class kind of politesse across the country. So like my twisted sense of humor from England does not land well here. So I stopped doing it. Like they don't banter. So it's like, okay, but because they get offended. They don't know what banter is, so you don't do it. And then the Americans have their own thing going on. But working with Australians, I have to say, I relax and you guys relax. You're just like real easy to, oh, we can do this, blah, 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 blah. And it feels like coming home to me, right? It's lovely. So one of my senior staff as well, Fleur Romano, she is now taking teaching the Stepping Stone cohorts because I'm taking a break to write a book. And she's Australian, so she's excited to be doing more courses, running those courses in Australia because it suits her time zone. I can do it from here, the west coast of Canada, because it fits the time zone. But my senior staff in the Eastern Canada, they can't really do it because of the time. So Fleur's doing that. In April, there'll be an offering of the Stepping Deeper course, which will be for Australians that have graduated level 1 or graduated the Stepping Stone course. And what the Stepping Stone course teaches is the model thoroughly, including how to do an unburdening and developing the confidence in that. So it's a thorough IFS course. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a real breadth. And that advanced weekend, is that only available to people who have done stepping stones, or is someone who's done a level 1 could come on that? Or
you can come if you've done a level 1.
You can come if you've done a level 1. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the master classes, that's just for anybody. Anyone could attend them. They're online. Great. Yeah. And so what's the process? Say I'm a therapist in Australia, I don't know IFS, I wanted to get into stepping stones. Is it just an online application? Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about what someone would have to do to get on there?
Yeah. Mental health professional, however you identify that, right? You have to be working one-on-one with people on a regular basis, right? So you can begin to apply the model. If you're not, people that are not will tend to feel de-skilled because the therapist is talking about, this came up with this client and this in the consult groups. And if you haven't got clients, it's just not a good idea. So a mental health professional, you're working one-on-one on an ongoing basis. You might be a coach, you might be a spiritual counselor, you might be a psychotherapist. As you probably know, if you look around the world, these terms are pretty arbitrary and random.
They're all kind of...
yeah. So are you working with people in a healing capacity one-on-one? And if you are, you're welcome to take the course. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Because, I mean, what you're really doing with IFS, if you don't know it, is you're starting from scratch. And many therapists have to unlearn what they've been doing, especially if they've been working in CBT. You know,
Yeah.
CBT is disrespectful of the parts. You know, it attempts to reframe them in a way that the therapist thinks they should be thinking, and is basically disrespectful of the system. So that's all got to be, those interventions have to be unlearned if you're going to be a successful IFS therapist.
Yeah. And is that the component of working with therapist parts in stepping stones? So working with the ones that know other models, that want to intervene or help or change or fix?
It could be. It's more about, it's actually more about looking at your therapist exiles, right? So, yeah. So so a question I ask is, what's scary about being a therapist, right? And then, like in session in particular, what's scary? And once we've established that, what do you do when you get scared, right? And once we've got two lists up, there's your therapy exiles because they're scared. These are your therapy managers that come in to take care of your exiles. So that might be things like, I'll invite the client to breathe with me. Well, nothing wrong with that per se as an intervention. But if it's because you think they're going to notice that you're a phony, then it'll come across as a managerial intervention. So, Ollie, let's just stop everything right now and take a breath with me, right? What the hell? Where'd that come from, you know?
That's happened to me so many times in therapy, I must say. Before I found an IFS therapist.
Oh yeah, you know, either do that or like reference the literature to make yourself sound smart, or like, you know, clock watch and then say you're not, or offer to go over time. Like we all have managing strategies, but if they're connected to the therapist exiles, then they're going to block your self energy, and they are not in service of the client, because our managers are in service of our own exiles. And that's what never, as far as I can see, it never gets taught in psychotherapy schools. And so psychotherapists don't even know they're doing it. So you bring that into consciousness, work with your exiles, get to know your managers so they can pull back, and you're much more able to hold your self energy in the sessions.
Great. Yeah. I'm just going to ask one more question, Suzanne, if that's okay. Derek, did you ever imagine, I've been thinking about this last night as my parts sort of prepared for the session. Did you ever imagine that you would get to a point where you would be influencing this amount of people? Like 22,000 people subscribing to your channel and, you know, nearly 2 million views. Did you imagine that it would grow that far when you had that, you know, video camera and you're standing on top of your ladder? Like
No, but I'm really glad, because like the reason I did all that was this is important, right? And I have a social justice part, which, you know, as you know, earlier was talking about, you know, the toxic ideology, but also therapy is elitist, right? Many people can't afford therapy. Now, rich people need therapy, so that's good. So I charge what, you know, a reasonable rate for the training that people can afford. But the people that can't afford it, that frees up my time to make these free videos, or to be able to work with, you know, I did some work a few years ago with Iranian psychologists, and they have no money. So they were able to contribute whatever they could contribute, which was fine by me. And I was able to teach them the model without having to worry about, I need to pull in a certain amount of money. So I balanced it out. And the YouTube channel has a lot of free videos, including there's a video series on working with shame, which if people want to, I mean, just go there and try it out, right? There's videos about working with grief. It's an area of specialty I have because of the AIDS work I did in the 80s. There's videos about understanding this model. There's more demos, just free demos, annotated demos about how to do this work and what it looks like. So it makes sense to me that it's become popular. And I'm thrilled, because the more people that can access this understanding that may not be able to afford therapeutic work, nonetheless, they know that they have parts, they know that they have systems, and maybe they can begin to do that work for themselves. That's my hope. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I'm just imagining, like, you know, in IFS, we talk about, you know, doing the healing work with your client. It ripples out from them into their family and into their community. And I'm just imagining this huge wave of a ripple from the videos that you've put online. And I know that it's rippled into my life and into how I am with my kids, how I am as a therapist. And so I imagine there's many people like me that those videos have touched. So yeah, it's a big ripple.
It's a big ripple, but I do want to say, Ollie, that the pebble is Dick Schwartz. That's what I might have been one of the early ripples, right? But the pebble is Dick Schwartz. So let's
Yes.
credit where credit should be.
Pedals Dick
Yeah.
Schwartz, yeah. You're one of the vehicles of sharing it.
Yeah, I'm one of the early ripples. That's what I do. Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Suzanne.
So I guess as we come to a close in our conversation, I've got one more question for you, Derek.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if there was one question that you wish that we'd asked you, what would it have been and how would you have answered?
Wow. So I'm not aware of wanting, that there's something missing. I've really enjoyed the conversation with both of you. But let me sit with the question for a moment. For me, the question would be, what is the most powerfully transformative aspect of the model? And the answer, there's a part of me that's shy about answering that and concerned that it might turn people off. So I'm letting you know it may, and there are people that won't turn off. I've had experiences with this work, with this understanding. I don't even like to call it a model, this understanding of being, because I think it's an accurate understanding of being, which have invited me to become aware of other realms, if you like. And what seems very clear to me through some of those experiences is that we are indeed souls traveling through these bodies this time around, learning the lessons that we need to learn in order to manifest who we are. And there's a teaching by Rabbi Noah Greenberg, which I love. So this is how I would want to answer it, I think, because Rabbi Greenberg says, before we are born, the angel throws our life path in front of us with all the challenges and the difficulties.
Yeah.
In order, and we need those challenges and difficulties so that we can grow from them and so that we can manifest who we are, our soul's purpose this time around. And when we say yes to what the angel is showing us, the angel gives us a kiss right here and says, now you must forget, right? So we have to learn and take all those journeys. But that's why when we get very thoughtful and we're remembering who we are and why we're here, we do this. We revisit the angel's kiss, right? What am I doing? Yeah, what exactly am I doing here?
Yeah.
And that's the most beautiful teaching and seems to be the way of things to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Love that
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah. What a
And
great
that answer.
question. Yes. Thank you. So I know
Go on.
you're busy at the moment. You're in the middle of writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if people want to get in touch with you or, they want to ask you a question or, they want to get in touch about stepping stones or something.
Yeah, via the website's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll put all the things that you've mentioned in the show notes. They'll be underneath the YouTube video and they'll be on our IFS Down Under page. So you'll be able to find Derek's website and the links to the different masterclasses and courses. I'll put that on there. Yeah.
Cheers. All right.
Okay. Thank you so much, Derek. That was a deep, a rich, and a surprising conversation. So thank you.
What was surprising?
The elements that you brought in around healing, shame, spirituality, and the depth that you just went in that last question that you answered yourself. There was a few things that I didn't realize we'd get to. And I'm glad that we did, because Suzanne and I think I could speak for you, but please correct me if I'm wrong. We have a deep interest in going to other forms of healing and deeper places that I think the model in the early stages doesn't talk about in the trainings and things, but allows access to. And it was just nice that you tied in those all throughout the conversation, and then right at the end. So that was the surprising part, and that I loved about our conversation.
Now, how's your little one that was all nervous that's sitting on your shoulder? Is he doing okay?
Oh, he's doing, let me check. Yeah, he's glad he was here, and he really appreciated you checking in with him before we started. So thank you.
Good. I'm glad he was here too. Good.
Yeah.
All right. That feels like a wrap.
Okay, that feels like a wrap. So I'm just going to stop the recording, and then we can have a little chat.